And now I'd like to look at bar 9 of the revolutionary Etude. And in the video I uploaded previous to this, I play the revolutionary Etude. And I wanted to show how this fingering, I used the Alan Cochlin fingering system while playing this Etude, and I wanted to show how it works in the context of an entire piece from beginning to end, because with a lot of technique videos, you'll see, like, to illustrate how a technique works or how something works, they'll show you a snippet. And you might have experienced this. I know I did when I was searching for technique. The phenomenon how things in isolation, you can do things, but in the context of a piece they don't work. Like, you might be able to play a C major scale, an octave, and just whip through it at top speed, and it's like one gesture. But if it's demanded of you in the context of a piece, it doesn't work that way. And so I wanted to show, I uploaded the entire piece so you can see how it works in the context of an entire piece from beginning to end. And I just want to look at bar 9. I'm going to compare G. Henley Verlaag's, the fingering supplies in the edition G. Henley Verlaag edition of the Chopin Etudes. So the fingering in that, which I would call normal fingering, which I think most people would use, and in other editions I would say that the fingering is going to be extremely similar, and compare it to the Alan Cochlin fingering system in many of the same ways as I've compared those 3 simple phrases. Now in bar 9 is that where, after the introduction, where the main accompaniment figure, or the left hand figure, presents itself, and it spans a little more than 2 octaves. And so the Henley Verlaag fingering goes 5-2-1-4-3-2, 1-3-2-3, 1-2-3-4, 1-2-5. And the Alan Cochlin fingering, so those notes are C, G, C, D, E flat, G, C, D, E flat, going up. So the first notes are C, G, and C. And with the Alan Cochlin fingering, there is no fingers better at playing the white keys than the thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger. So with the Alan Cochlin fingering, that will have you play that C, G, and C with 1, 3, and 5. No, sorry, we're talking about the left hand. So it would have you playing those first 3 notes with 5, 3, and 1. And then, given the position of the E flat and the continuation, Bach will always talk about this now, the Folge, he says, and that can be translated as the continuation or the succession. I don't know which word is better to use, but I say continuation. So given the position of the E flat and the continuation, and given that there is no better finger at playing a black key than the 4th finger, with the Alan Cochlin fingering, you put the 4th finger on the E flat, which means the little finger will go on the D. And then, given that the little finger, the 3rd finger, and the thumb are best able to play white keys, the third finger will play the G, and the thumb will play the C. And then when you're up at the top of that pattern, before it goes back down again, there's the D and the E flat. Now, given that the fourth finger and the second finger are best able to play black keys, and given the position of the E flat and the way the hand is going to go down again, I will use the second finger on the E flat and then the third finger on the D before that. And just like the Henley for lag repeats that fingering on the way down, so does the Alan Cochlin fingering. So the Alan Cochlin fingering is 5-3-1, 5-4-3-1, 3-2, 3-1, 3-4-5, 1-3-5. So that's again how the formula is applied and the result. And you can see again the result. The Alan Cochlin fingering differs from normal fingering, or the G. Henley for lag fingering. And you can see in the G. Henley for lag fingering, you know, this beautiful mind logic. You have 5-2-1, 4-3-2-1. That's nice and logical because the numbers, you know, it goes 5-4-3-2-1, so 4-3-2-1 is nice, a nice logical application of the fingers. You can see that there, and you can see with the Alan Cochlin fingering 5-3-1, 5-4-3-1, 3-2-3-1, 3-4-5, 1-3-5. It doesn't adhere to that logic, the beautiful mind logic, in the slightest. So with the Henley for lag fingering, they use the little finger once, the fourth finger in that bar 9, the fourth finger twice, the third finger 4 times, the second finger 5 times, and the thumb 4 times. And the Alan Cochlin fingering uses the little finger 3 times, the fourth finger twice, the third finger 6 times, the second finger once, and the thumb 4 times. And so the pivot is used with the Henley for lag fingering 4 times, and the pivot with Alan Cochlin fingering is used 6 times. And left and right of the pivot, those fingers in combination left of the pivot with the Henley for lag fingering are used in the total a number of 3 times. And to the right of that pivot they're used 9 times. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, the fingers used to the left in combination to the left of the pivot are used a total of 5 times. And those fingers used to the right of the pivot in combination are used a total of 5 times. So the Henley for lag fingering is 3-4-9, and the Alan Cochlin fingering is 5-6-5. So you can see the Alan Cochlin fingering is better balanced than the Henley for lag fingering when you look at it from that angle. Now, the Henley for lag has you alternating fingers between black and white keys, which is extra movement, regardless of what you think, what the result of that extra movement is. It is extra movement. So the Henley for lag fingering has you alternate fingers 5 times. The Alan Cochlin fingering has you alternate the fingers between black and white keys 0 times. So that's 5 extra movements demanded of the fingers from the Henley for lag fingering that the Alan Cochlin fingering does not demand. And if you consider if you agree with Chopin and consider the third finger the pivot. You will see in that this pattern of bar, it's based on the idea of pivots. And in this bar, there are 6 pivot notes. And one is the G's are the pivot notes, and then the D before the E flat at the top. And they, when you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They appear 6 times. And you will see with the Alan Cochlin fingering that for those 6 notes, those 6 pivot notes, the Alan Cochlin fingering will have you use the pivot to play all those notes. And since Chopin called it the pivot, you could accept maybe that the job, one of the jobs it's best at is as a pivot. And not only is it best at playing white keys, it is best as the pivot. If you were to nickname it like Chopin did, he called it the pivot. Normally you'd nickname somebody based on what they can do. So with the Alan Cochlin fingering, there's 6 pivots in that bar, and the pivot is used 6 times on every single time. With the Henley for lag fingering, the pivot is used only twice as a pivot, and the other times it is used on the E flat, which it's a job that it can do, but it's not as good at playing the black keys as the 2nd or 4th finger. So you're giving the G Henley for lag is taking away the job as pivot and giving it another job which other fingers can perform better. Now the 2nd finger in that bar, the Alan Cochlin fingering has you use that 2nd finger once to play the E flat at the top of the pattern. The G Henley for lag has you use it to play, has you use the 2nd finger 5 times. One of those times is to play that E flat, the job it can actually do. The other 4 times it has to act as the pivot. So it is taking away, it has been given the job that the 3rd finger is better at. It has to act as pivot. It gets to do the one job it's actually good at, play that black key, plus it has to alternate twice between black and white keys. So while with the Alan Cochlin fingering, the 2nd finger has to play 1 key in that bar, and that 1 key is the job it can do best, namely play a black note, play a black key. Whereas the Henley for lag takes the job of pivot away from the 3rd finger, gives it to the 2nd finger, has that finger alternate between a black and white key, which is extra movement, twice, making and taxing it a total of 5 times in order to play that phrase. And with the pivot, the pivot in the G Henley for lag fingering, that has to alternate between black and white keys 3 times. So not only is it given jobs it can't do, or it's not as good at, the jobs it is good at is taken away from it. It as well has to alternate 3 times between black and white keys. And all it does in the Alan Cochlin fingering is does the job of the pivot. It doesn't have to alternate, it doesn't have to do anything else. So the 3rd finger doesn't have to do anything other than the job it can best do, and the 2nd finger doesn't have to do anything except the job it can best do. and the fourth finger. In the G Henley Verlag, the fourth finger is used twice. And in the Alan Cochlin fingering, the fourth finger is used twice. Those two times with the G Henley Verlag, it is playing a white key. A job, something according to the Alan Cochlin fingering, it cannot do. Whereas with the Alan Cochlin fingering, those two times that the fourth finger is used, it is to play the job. It is best above all other fingerings. And you might think I'm wrong or saying that the fourth finger can't play a white key and that I'm discriminating. And again, you know, the normal fingering is more liberal. But if I said the fourth finger is the weakest of all fingers, you'd nod, because it's often said that the fourth finger is the weakest of all fingers. And in a documentary about Chopin, Andras Schiff quoted Chopin, I can't remember it, but he said one of the things that Chopin has been given is a disobedient fourth finger. So if when it's said that the fourth finger is disobedient, when Chopin, nobody say, hang on Chopin, you're wrong there. No, everybody will nod and say, oh yes, the fourth finger is the weakest of the fingers. Everybody will nod. The fourth finger is the least independent of all the fingers. Everybody will nod, and some people, you know, you'll hear people who'll say, yeah, it's sharing a common ligament, which I'm not saying is not true. And so medically, you can see that it's impossible to have an independent fourth finger, so it'll always be weak. So nobody is getting upset about that. Whereas the Alan Cochlin fingering is saying it can't play, it's acknowledging that the finger is weak. It acknowledges that it's unable to play a white key. Yet it acknowledges that it is the strongest of all fingers at playing black keys. Where do you hear the acknowledgement of the strength of the fourth finger in the common, in the public discussion? Nowhere. I'll bet. I haven't. And I've seen a lot of piano. So the Alan Cochlin finger acknowledges the fourth finger as being the strongest of all fingers at playing the black keys. So with the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, the fourth finger is both the weakest and the strongest finger. So the Alan Cochlin fingering has the fourth finger play 2 notes in that bar, and both of those notes are black keys. How utilizing the entire hand. With the G Henley Verlag, the entire hand is used. If you take at the end of that phrase the next C, the C on the next bar to kind of end the pattern, it uses the entire hand twice. The Alan Cochlin fingering system uses the entire hand in order to play that passage 4 times. So that's the comparison. The Alan Cochlin fingering is more evenly balanced with 5-6-5. The Henley Verlag is imbalanced with 3, 4 and 9. The Henley Verlag has you alternate fingers between black and white keys 5 times. The Alan Cochlin fingering has you alternate fingers between black and white keys 0 times. And the Henley Verlag utilizes the entire hand, the width, the span of the entire hand twice. Whereas the Alan Cochlin fingering utilizes the entire hand 4 times in that phrase. So Alan Cochlin fingering beats Henley Verlag fingering. And with the Alan Cochlin fingering, you do not need any cause of concern about playing the thumb after the little finger. And if as long as those fingers are playing those keys they're best able to play. There is no concerns about using, you'll use your little finger without hesitation on a white key. And there you can see with the normal fingering, at the start you might think, you know, it's less restrictive than the Alan Cochlin fingering. However, most people fingering pieces are going to avoid using the fifth finger as much as possible, and they're going to concentrate on trying to play everything using the thumb, the second finger and the third finger. And they'll include the fourth finger, but unhappily, you know, when they're really looking at the end result of what they're doing, the fourth finger will always let them down. But they'll go at all odds is the use of the little finger to be avoided with the normal fingering. It doesn't acknowledge its strength of playing white keys. It doesn't acknowledge the fourth finger's strength at playing black keys. And so, which fingering is the more restrictive in reality? So that's that bar compared. And I want to compare then the following bar 10. And that's the same pattern, except in it's contracted, it's condensed. It spans just a little more than an octave instead of going up 2 octaves. And so it's played twice in the same bar. And so the Henley fingering is 5-2-1-3-2, 3-1-2, 5-2-1, 3-2, 3-1-2. And then 5 if you finish it off with the first note of the next bar. And with the Alan Cochlin fingerings, so the thumb, the middle finger and the little finger are the fingers best able to play white keys, given the first 3 notes are C, G and C. The Alan Cochlin fingering would have you play those 3 notes with 5-3-1. And then, given the E flat, that the 2 fingers best able to play the E flat are the second and fourth finger, and given the position of the E flat, and that you're going back down again, with the Alan Cochlin fingering you'd play the E flat with the second finger, and then you'd play the third finger, use the D, the third finger on the D. So what you get is 5-3-1, 3-2, 3-1, 3-5, 3-1, 3-2, 3-1-3, and then 5 if you finish it off. So with the Henley fingering, the normal fingering, you use the little finger twice, the fourth finger 0 times, the third finger 4 times, the second finger 6 times, and the first finger or the thumb 4 times. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, you use the fifth finger twice, the third finger 8 times, the second finger twice, and the first finger the thumb 4 times. Now the fingers that you use to the left of the pivot with the Henley Verlag combined in total is twice, and to the right of the pivot in combination combined totals 10 times. With the Alan Cochlin fingering to the left of the pivot, in total those fingers are used twice, and to the right of the pivot those fingers are used in combination a total of 6 times. So with the Henley Verlag it's 2, 4, 10, and with the Alan Cochlin fingering it's 2, 8, 6. Now in that bar, that's again is based on a pivot idea. There's 8 pivot notes in that bar. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, you're using the pivot 8 times, each for those notes. Whereas with the G. Henley Verlag, you're using the pivot 4 times on 4 of those 8 pivot notes. The Henley Verlag fingering, the normal fingering, is assigning 4 of those pivot jobs to the second finger. So you're using the second finger a total of 6 times with the Henley fingering. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, you're using the second finger twice. So that's 6 minus those pivot jobs, which Alan Cochlin fingering gives to the pivot. You're left with the 2 actual jobs of the second finger that it can do best, and that is playing black keys. So the only thing the second finger has to do with the Alan Cochlin fingering is play the black keys. Whereas it has to do that job with the Henley Verlag, but it also has to act as a pivot 4 times. While the pivot is doing nothing. With the Henley Verlag fingering, you have to alternate the second finger 3 times in that bar. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, you don't have to alternate the fingers between the black and white keys at all, 0 times. So that's 3 extra finger movements that the Henley Verlag fingering requires of you, that the Alan Cochlin fingering does not require of you. Now, in using the entire hand, the Henley Verlag fingering uses the entire hand a total of 3 times if you include the first note of the next bar to finish off the pattern. And the Alan Cochlin fingering uses the entire hand a total of 3 times. However, how it uses the entire hand. The G. Henley Verlag uses the entire hand, but it uses the thumb, the second finger, and the little finger. Whereas with the Alan Cochlin fingering system, you're using the entire hand, but those fingers you use is the thumb, the third finger, and the little finger. So if you think of it as a boat, this is the left and right of the boat, or the front and back of the boat, the port and starboard. Well, the Henley Verlag boat will be lopsided because the weight is distributed too far to the right. Whereas with the Alan Cochlin fingering, it's on the 2 ends, the 2 sides plus in the middle. So the weight, if it's in both terms, is evenly distributed with the Alan Cochlin fingering. Whereas with the Henley Verlag, it's lopsided. So if you look at it in terms of, they drew, the Henley Verlag and Alan Cochlin, when using the entire hand, it was a draw. So in order to determine who's the winner, you look closer. And when you look closer, you can see that the Alan Cochlin fingering wins in terms of how it balances that hand that's being used, compared to the Henley Verlag, which has that hand lopsided. So you can see that the Alan Cochlin fingering is winning. Now, and I'm going to look at one final section, one final bar of the revolutionary etude, and that is bar 1, the first bar. So G Henley for lag would have you, the left hand, the first bar of the revolutionary etude, would have you finger it, suggest 2-1-2-4, 3-1-2-4, 3-1-2-4, 3-1. The Alan Cochlin fingering. Since the second and fourth finger are the best able to play black keys, and given the A flat at the top of that downward pattern, you would use the second finger on that A flat. And since the next notes going downwards are G, F and D, and because 1, 3 and 5 are the fingers best able to play white keys, you will use 1, 3 and 5 to play that G, F and D. And given the continuation of the pattern and that the position of the next black note, with the Alan Cochlin fingering you would play that with 2. And that then repeats itself. So if you were to look at, with the G Henley for lag, it uses the little finger 0 times, the fourth finger 3 times, the third finger 3 times, the second finger 4 times, and the thumb 4 times. The Alan Cochlin fingering has you use the little finger 3 times, the fourth finger 0 times, the third finger 3 times, the second finger 4 times, and the first finger 4 times. Now, in terms of left and right of the pivot, they're the same. To the left of the pivot, the Alan Cochlin and G Henley for lag would is 3 times to the left of the pivot, and to the right of the pivot it's 8 times. And the pivot is used in both fingerings 3 times. But there is no pivot. This pattern is not based on that principle of there being a pivot. It's a repeated pattern without a pivot. It doesn't go up and down, it just goes down. With the G Henley for lag, it requires you to alternate between a black and white key once. And so, on the very first note, the G Henley for lag has you play the A flat. And then, in the space of one note later, it has that same finger alternating to and changing position in order to play a white key. And all you're given, there's 3 movements that second finger has to do. It has to depress 2 keys, and it has to change position in order to press the white key properly. Because what can cause tension as well is playing a key incorrectly. And the more incorrectly you play the key, the faster. It's like what Bach said about in the introduction, or in the footnote, about the trommel Besse. Repeated. If you play it with the wrong position, you're going to stiffen quicker. So you are given, with the Henley for lag fingering, gives you the space of one note in a very fast piece. It requires 3 movements of that second finger. And so you haven't even really started, and the tension is already begun with the G Henley for lag. Whereas the Alan Cochlin fingering demands no alternating of the fingers between black and white keys. With the Allen Cochlin fingering in that bar, it utilizes the entire hand 3 times. The G Henley Verlag 0 times. And when you think of in terms of balance, given that there's no pivot, and in both cases the Allen Cochlin fingering uses the 4th finger 0 times, the G Henley Verlag uses the little finger 0 times. If you think of it not as so, that if you cancel out those 2 zeros, what you get is 4 fingers. And so there's no middle, there's no pivot. It's, the halves are 2 fingers. And when you see how it's spread out, with the G Henley Verlag, you have the 2 fingers used are, if you think this is the half, all the weight is distributed on the one side, a little over half of the compartment, whereas with the Allen Cochlin fingering, it's distributed in each side of that compartment. So the Allen Cochlin fingering is again more balanced than normal fingering, than the Beautiful Mind fingering. So, and that was a lot. So there it is again. It's the Allen Cochlin fingering system. This is the formula. And now you know it. Now it's been presented. Now it exists. It officially exists. And given that it's a complete... The other thing is, the advantage of the Allen Cochlin system of fingering is that given that it's a formula, there's a consistency there. And you can see in terms of the results of how often you have to alternate, it's organized. You are not jumbling up black and white notes. They're organized. They're compartmentalized. The black notes are put in one place and the black keys are put in one place and the white keys are put in another. They do not mix up. You don't have, you don't have a bunch of black keys in among the white keys. They're separated, and there's a consistency in how you finger all your pieces, every single thing. So, and I know from when I use normal fingering, that every time you start a new piece, it's like you're starting from scratch again, and then you have a passage, and it's a big blank question mark as to how will I finger this passage, and as well, what happens with normal fingering is you like I will have done this when I used normal fingering, that I'll be making resolutions in terms of wanting to do it better, that I'll how many times do you try and use the fingering, and then all of a sudden you're just using some different fingering, and or you're playing somewhere and all of a sudden you get through it, but it wasn't the fingering you used, or every single time you're using a different fingering, and it's very hard to actually, it takes a lot of discipline to actually use the fingering that's written in on the page. With the Allen Cochlin fingering system, that doesn't happen. You're always using the same fingering. It's organized every single time, which in one way is one element that aids memory. And it's like in a jigsaw, if you know if this has happened to you in a jigsaw, where you'll make a jigsaw and you'll have all these little bits and it seems like you're getting nowhere with the jigsaw. But then all of a sudden you realize that those bits join up together, and so all of a sudden you're much further in. You've progressed much more with the jigsaw than you thought before you realized all those separate pieces actually joined up, or like those separate sections all joined up to one. And it's a great feeling with a jigsaw, you know, when that happens, when you find out, oh yeah, these 4 bits, they all join up together, and it, you know, all of a sudden you have a big part of the jigsaw made. And it's like this with the Alan Cochlin fingering system. Because you are consistently fingering every single piece, you nothing is new. It means you're learning that fingering consistently every single time. It doesn't matter what piece you're playing, you're learning that fingering, and it's working. And because it works, you don't end up using it. You naturally use the fingering. The reason it's so hard to stick to a fingering that's in a book is because they're not applying logic. They apply this beautiful mind logic. You're always looking, when you finger something normally, you're always looking, what notes come one after the other, and how can I use 1, 2, 3, or 2, 3, and 4, or 3, 4, and 5 to use them, and how can I avoid using the little finger in order to play that. So that's an advantage of the Alan Cochlin fingering, is that because it's governed by a core formula, and that logic, like I said, it's based on finger position, the characteristics of the finger, the cause of tension, the cause of unevenness, sound, and the nature of the music. So how much logic is applied by you when you're assigning fingering to a passage, or by your teacher? What are they thinking? Are they just thinking, how do I put the fingers in before? How many fingers can I put in before I run out of them? So that's it. That's the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, and I'm going to compare, as somebody who has developed their own system of fingering, I'm going to compare it with what Bach says when we look at the chapter on fingering. And so, I don't know, perhaps just even in comparing it there with normal fingering, there's some angles already that you might not have considered when considering fingering. And you've maybe seen there some new ways to look at it. And the Alan Cochlin fingering beat normal fingering every single time. It dismantled it, it obliterated it. And where does normal fingering obliterate or dismantle the AC fingering system? And where is the logic? Where is the formula of normal fingering? Where is the system? It doesn't have a system. So you're welcome to use it. If you don't, I'm happy to be the only person in the whole world using this system of fingering. I'm very happy at that. But I'm as well happy if you use it and you've realized the advantages, because it could be that if you use that, you'll never want to go use the normal system of fingering or the normal fingering ever again, because it's just it's been sitting on the throne, and it's and it doesn't deserve to be on the throne. It's fat and it's lazy. So I'll leave it at that. I was just thinking, well, one last thing. I was thinking about what Bach says about trephers. And I was, and players from profession, you know, who play fast notes and hit the right notes. And I was thinking that there are two ways to play the piano. One is by the metronome. And I mean by the metronome, I mean anything that involves, you know, metronome, finger exercises, grouping, breaking things up into patterns, playing, practicing, and, you know, all that sort of thing, counting out loud. That's by the metronome. And you'll find players, as Bach describes in his book, you can get to the end of the line by playing the piano by the metronome. You'll go to concerts where professional pianists have learned to play the piano by the metronome. You'll see professors who play the piano by the metronome. People who have their careers in music who play by the metronome. And the other way to play the piano is by nature. And I would say that Evgeny Kissin is an example of a piano player who plays by nature. And I'll bet, of course I can't know that, I have no insight into his private life or anything like that, or his practice life. But I would say he has never practiced with the metronome. I would say he doesn't group, he doesn't break things up into rhythms. Maybe he practices hands separately, I don't know. I don't need to practice hands separately. I never practice hands separately. And not once. Like in that revolutionary Etude, I did not once at all ever practice hands separately. So by nature. So that's what I was thinking. There's two ways to play the piano. By nature, or by the metronome and by nature. However, the only true beauty is nature. Musa's sign is moose sign. That's it. Okay. Thanks. Bye.